The tale of the Nine Rings is one of sorrow and treachery. Forged in the shadow of Sauron's deceitful guidance, the Nine Rings were gifted to mortal kings and lords of men who desired power, wisdom, and longevity. Yet these gifts were poisoned. Sauron infused the rings with a fragment of his own malice, intending them as instruments of enslavement. The bearers were transformed into the Nazgul, neither living nor dead. Stripped of their will and bound eternally to Sauron, became shadows, embodying the cost of succumbing to unchecked ambition. But what if the Nine Rings had failed in their purpose? What if men, vulnerable yet resilient, resisted their corrupting influence? The implications ripple far beyond the fate of the Nine, reshaping the history of Middle-earth itself. The failure of the Nine to corrupt men would strike at the core of Sauron's strategy. Without the Nazgul, his most loyal and terrifying servants, his dominion over Middle-earth would be fractured. The Nazgul were his enforcers, his spies, and the harbingers of his will. If they had remained untainted, the struggle for Middle-earth would have unfolded on entirely different terms. Sauron's mastery over the rings relied on their bearers' susceptibility to pride and fear of mortality, traits woven deeply into the nature of men. In their rejection of the Nine, however, these kings and lords might have exemplified a profound resistance to despair, a refusal to bow to the false promises of immortality. Such defiance would echo the ancient heroism of Numenor's faithful and might even rekindle a unity among the kingdoms of men. Yet this scenario raises an unsettling question. Would the failure of the Night to corrupt men have left Sauron more dangerous, forced to adapt and intensify his schemes? The loss of the Nazgul would significantly alter the balance of power in the Third Age. The Ringwraiths were essential to Sauron's resurgence after his defeat at the end of the Second Age. They retrieved the One Ring's whereabouts, spread terror, and subdued rebellion in distant lands. Without them, Sauron would have relied solely on lesser servants such as orcs, Easterlings, and Southrons, forces lacking the supernatural dread the Nazgul inspired. Consider also the psychological weight the Nazgul carried. Their presence sowed fear and despair, weakening the resolve of Sauron's enemies. Denied their terror, the Free Peoples might have found greater strength in unity. Gondor, embattled but unbroken, could have forged stronger alliances with Rohan and the North Kingdoms. The Rangers of the North, already a vestige of the lost Númenórean kingdoms, might have stepped forward to play a more prominent role in resisting Sauron's expansion. However, the absence of the Nazgul does not eliminate the One Ring. Its lure would remain, casting its shadow over Middle-earth's fate. Could the uncorrupted bearers of the Nine have safeguarded their realms against the Ring's temptation? Or would their rejection of one form of corruption leave them vulnerable to another? The rejection of the Nine would also redefine Sauron's standing in the hierarchy of power. His trust in the rings as tools of domination highlights his dependency on others' weaknesses. A failed plan to corrupt men might reveal Sauron's limitations, possibly provoking a shift in his tactics toward a more direct and brutal form of domination. Without the subjugation of the mind through the Nine, Sauron might have intensified his reliance on overwhelming military force, or further manipulated the rings given to the dwarves. These rings, while less effective in corrupting the dwarves' strong wills, still fueled greed and division. A Middle-earth devoid of Nazgul might find itself more divided as dwarven realms fractured under the strain of Sauron's schemes. In addition, the failure of the Nine would ripple into the inner dynamics of Sauron's strategy. The Nazgul were not only servants, but a manifestation of Sauron's ingenuity in exploiting fear and mortality. Their failure would expose a vulnerability in his otherwise cunning mind. This would force him to adopt new methods, perhaps creating an era where deception played a smaller role and brute power reigned. Without his shadowy agents spreading despair and surveillance across the land, his enemies would act more freely. But resistance by the bearers of the Nine also hints at a deeper spiritual awakening. The rejection of the Nine Rings might signify a broader movement of rebellion against Sauron's darkness, rekindling the latent strength of men seen in the Edain of the First Age. Could this rejection create a world where men, free from the shackles of fear, grow to fulfill their potential as the inheritors of Arda, as Ilúvatar intended? Middle-earth, without the Nazgul, would look vastly different. The eerie presence of the Black Riders at the ring's inception would be absent, and Frodo's perilous journey might feel less immediate in its dread. The terror of the Witch King of Angmar, whose fall in the Battle of Pelennor Fields was pivotal, would not hang over Gondor's defenders. Yet this absence might invite unforeseen dangers. Without the Nazgul, Sauron's enemies might underestimate his reach, focusing solely on the One Ring while ignoring other creeping shadows. Moreover, what of the unclaimed Nine Rings themselves? These artifacts, wrought with power and malice, could still wreak havoc if left in the wrong hands. Perhaps lesser tyrants, untainted by Sauron's direct influence, would rise to claim them, leading to fragmented struggles rather than the unified assault against Sauron witnessed in the War of the Ring. The rejection of the Nine by their intended bearers could also affect the narrative of Frodo and Sam. Gollum, whose lust for the One Ring is fueled in part by the Nazgul's hunt, might act differently without their looming threat. The Fellowship might face different trials in Mordor, encountering orcish hordes or other manifestations of Sauron's power instead of the spectral menace of the Ringwraiths. Yet the Nazgul, for all their terror, also symbolize the human condition. They embody the tragic flaw of mortality, fear of death, and the desire for immortality twisted into enslavement. A world without their corruption forces us to ask, would men rise to embrace their gift of Ilúvatar, or would they falter in other, subtler ways? Ultimately, the failure of the Nine Rings to corrupt men would represent a profound victory of free will over predestination. This scenario would alter the cosmic balance between good and evil, as men, often seen as the most fragile and fallible of the free peoples, would ascend to a higher moral plane. Such a triumph would resonate throughout the ages, challenging the assumption that men are easily corrupted. Yet this alternate history is bittersweet. Without the Nazgul, the tale of the rings loses a layer of tragedy and depth. Their failure to corrupt might shift the narrative focus to the inherent nobility of men, but it risks diminishing the poignant themes of loss and redemption that permeate Tolkien's legendarium. For the Nazgul's tale is a cautionary one, a reminder of the cost of ambition and the thin line between desire and enslavement. In the end, the rejection of the Nine Rings would mark a triumph of spirit, of subjugation. But it would also test the resilience of Middle-earth in new ways, forcing the free peoples to confront the darkness not through fear, but through unity and hope. Would such a world be brighter? Or would the shadows merely take another form? The answer, perhaps, lies in the enduring wisdom of Tolkien himself, that even the smallest acts of courage can shape the fate of the world.